In the midst of a brutal war between humans and alien invaders, one soldier's blood changes everything. Kian Armitage, the last man standing, is ready to die at the hands of an unstoppable alien warrior, until a single drop of his blood strikes her and stops the battle cold. What she sees in that moment shatters everything she believes, and now, both are hunted by their people. A bond formed in blood, an ancient secret awakened, and two enemies must decide, will they fight to destroy each other, or fight together to uncover a truth that could change both their worlds forever? If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The battlefield was a scene of chaos and devastation. The once proud colony now lay in ruins, with thick clouds of red smoke rising from the scorched earth, mixing with the cold, dry air. The sounds of explosions echoed across the valley, followed by the piercing shrieks of war. Blades clashed, guns fired, and the screams of the fallen could be heard from every direction. It was a place where the earth itself seemed to cry out in agony. And amidst the destruction stood one human soldier, Kian Armitage, who had fought to the bitter end. Kian was tired, beyond exhausted. His armor, once shining with the insignia of his unit, was now battered and cracked. Blood trickled down his left arm, staining the metal, yet he remained standing. The battle had taken hours, and his comrades were long gone, either crushed under the heavy blows of the alien invaders, or turned to ash by the brutal plasma rounds. The weight of his failures pressed down on him, but he refused to fall. He was the last one left. In front of him, an alien warrior approached, a formidable figure that seemed to tower over him. Her name was Kyla, a champion of the Arathu, a race of alien warriors feared across the stars. Her tall frame was encased in black armor, decorated with glowing blue lines that pulsed with an eerie light. Her skin was a dark, grayish hue, and her sharp amber eyes gleamed with cold determination. She moved with the grace of a predator, every step she took making the ground tremble beneath her. Her enormous blade scraped the earth as she walked toward Kian, ready to finish what the war had started. The Arathu soldiers surrounding them watched eagerly, their bloodlust palpable. They chanted in their alien tongue, waiting for the moment when their champion would strike down the last human standing. Kian's breathing was shallow, and his body ached with the weight of the wounds he had sustained. But even as his strength began to fade, his resolve remained unbroken. He gripped his knife with trembling hands, its once sharp edge now dulled and chipped. He raised it weakly toward Kayla, knowing it was nothing more than a futile gesture. Still, he stood tall. "I'm the last one left," he muttered, his voice hoarse but determined. "So I guess I'll make you fight me." Kayla stopped in her tracks. Her glowing eyes studied him, her lips curling into a slight sneer. She seemed to dismiss him as an insignificant nuisance, someone not even worth the effort. "You're not worth my time, human," she said in a deep, calm voice, her words filled with contempt. But despite her dismissive tone, she didn't advance right away. There was something about Kian's unwavering stance that caught her attention. The human before her, broken and bloodied, was the last obstacle in her path, yet he stood as if he had nothing left to lose, as if he would never yield. Kian's heart pounded in his chest as he braced himself for the inevitable. He had no illusions about surviving this encounter, but he wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing him surrender. He could already feel the weight of the world pressing on him, his limbs too heavy to move, his vision starting to blur. But still, he refused to drop his knife. He wasn't going to let the alien warrior strike him down without a fight. Kayla stepped forward with the speed of a striking serpent. In the blink of an eye, her massive blade was raised high, ready to deliver a deadly blow. Kian barely managed to raise his knife to block it, the force of the strike knocking him off his feet. The impact sent a shock of pain through his body, and his knife flew from his hand, landing somewhere out of reach. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from his chest, and blood poured from the fresh gashes in his armor. For a moment, he could barely breathe, struggling to regain his footing. His lungs burned as if the very air was against him, but he refused to give up. Kayla stood over him, her sword raised once again. This was it. The final blow. Kian could feel the cold steel of death approaching, but something inside him still refused to let go. He wasn't ready to die. Not yet. Then, in a desperate last-ditch effort, Kian reached for a jagged rock that lay nearby. His fingers brushed against its sharp edge, and with every ounce of strength he had left, he swung it at Kayla's legs. It wasn't much, just a glancing strike, but it was enough to catch her off guard. Kayla staggered back, her eyes widening for a brief moment in surprise. She hadn't expected him to fight back, to still have the will to strike after everything he had been through. Kian tried to rise, his vision spinning, his body trembling with exhaustion, but he managed to push himself to his knees. His blood smeared the ground as he tried to steady himself. The alien warrior stood before him, momentarily thrown off balance by the unexpected attack, but she quickly regained her composure, her eyes narrowing as she prepared to finish him off. Kian didn't have much time. His body was on the brink of collapse, and he knew this might be his last moment. But as he struggled to rise, something unexpected happened. A single drop of blood, fresh and red, slipped from his hand and flew through the air, landing on Kayla's face, right under her glowing amber eye. Everything stopped. Kayla blinked, her entire body freezing as if struck by some unseen force. Her expression shifted, her amber eyes wide with disbelief. She staggered back, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Her blade dropped from her hand, clattering to the ground. The warrior, who had killed countless humans who had never known fear, now stood frozen in front of Kian, her chest rising and falling rapidly as if something had shattered deep within her. Kian could barely comprehend what had just happened. Why had she stopped? Why wasn't she finishing him off? He felt weak, confused, and barely able to stay conscious. But his mind raced. What was happening? What had caused her to freeze like that? Kayla's gaze remained locked on him. But there was something different in her eyes. Fear. It was the first time Kian had seen it in her, and it made his blood run cold. She staggered backward, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, it's not possible," she whispered under her breath. Kian's mind was a haze of confusion as he lay on the ground, blood staining the earth beneath him. His chest heaved with every breath and his vision blurred at the edges. The battlefield, once filled with the sounds of explosions and screams, was now eerily silent. His eyes fluttered closed, but a sharp pain pulled him back to reality. His body was exhausted, battered, and broken, but something had happened, something he couldn't yet understand. The alien warrior, Kayla, stood motionless, her eyes wide with shock. Her weapon, the enormous blade she had used to strike down, so many before him, lay forgotten at her feet. Kian's blood had touched her, and for reasons he couldn't explain, everything had changed in that one instant. The confusion in her golden eyes mirrored the chaos in his mind. She was no longer the merciless, powerful warrior he had fought with until his last breath. Now, she looked as though she had seen a ghost, or worse, something even more terrifying. Kayla staggered back, her hand instinctively reaching up to touch the spot where his blood had fallen onto her face. Her breath came fast, uneven, as if she couldn't quite control her own body. She blinked, her eyes darting to Kian, then back, to the blood on her skin. The disbelief on her face was palpable. For a long moment neither moved, caught in some kind of strange, unspoken standoff. Kayla's warriors, the Arathu soldiers who had been so eager to watch her strike down the last human, fell silent. Even they could sense that something had changed, though none of them understood what it was. They watched, frozen, waiting for Kayla to give the signal for the final blow, but Kayla did nothing. She remained motionless, her sharp gaze fixed on Kian, as though searching for answers in his battered form. Kian's body trembled, and he struggled to stay conscious. His limbs were weak, his vision darkening again, but the sight of Kayla's confused expression made him feel a flicker of something, fear, uncertainty, or perhaps something even deeper. He didn't know what to make of it. She had been ready to end his life just moments before, And now she stood before him like someone caught in a terrible dream. The world around them seemed to slow, the sounds of battle fading into a quiet hum, as though time itself had frozen in this single, extraordinary moment. Kian didn't understand what was happening, but he couldn't deny the intensity of the change. Kayla's eyes widened and she took a step back, then another, as if she was retreating from something she couldn't quite grasp. Her warriors, still silent, looked between each other, unsure whether they should intervene or wait for their commander's orders. Kian couldn't find the strength to speak, his voice barely a whisper as he tried to lift himself from the ground. His blood dripped onto the earth, staining the soil, but it was clear that whatever had happened when his blood touched her had thrown Kayla into a state of confusion and fear. His mind raced, trying to piece together what had just occurred. Why had she stopped? What had his blood done to her? His blood was just that, blood, human blood. Yet for some reason, it had struck her like a lightning bolt. Kayla's gaze was locked on him, but there was no longer the cold, calculating look she had worn when she had first faced him. Now there was something else in her eyes, something Kian couldn't quite name. She was shaking, her body stiff, as though struggling to understand what she was feeling. Her hands, once steady and sure, were trembling as they reached up to her face. Slowly, her fingers brushed against the blood that still stained her skin. Kian watched her, barely able to keep his eyes open, his breath shallow and labored. He couldn't understand what was happening. He had been moments away from dying, and now it felt as though time had stopped, the world around him holding its breath. Kayla took another step back, her head tilting as she stared at him, her expression a mix of confusion and something deeper, something he couldn't fathom. "No, it's not possible," she whispered to herself, the words barely audible. She didn't move toward him, didn't raise her weapon to finish the job. Instead, she stood there staring at him like he was something from another world. Her voice cracked as she muttered again, almost as if she were trying to convince herself. "No, it can't be." Kian didn't know how to respond. He had no words, only a deep sense of confusion and dread. He was ready to die. He had come to terms with it. But now, with Kayla's strange reaction, he felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted. Was it the blood? Was there something about his blood that had triggered this reaction in her? He didn't know. The questions swirled in his mind, but there were no answers. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, Kayla's warriors began to murmur among themselves, their voices low and uncertain. The silence between Kian and Kayla stretched on, thick with unspoken tension. Kayla's breath slowed and she seemed to regain control of herself, though her eyes never left Kian's. She stepped back again, her warriors slowly circling, still unsure of what to do. Kian's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but all he could focus on was the look in Kayla's eyes. For the first time since he had seen her, she looked afraid. Not of him, but of something deeper. Something that had nothing to do with the fight, the war, or the alien invasion. It was as though the blood that had spilled from his body had unlocked something inside her. Something ancient. Something hidden away for centuries. As the seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity, Kayla finally spoke, her voice low and distant, as though she were speaking to herself. "I don't understand, but I have to know." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Kian on the ground, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what had just happened, but he knew one thing for certain. Everything had changed. The alien warrior who had come to kill him had turned away, and in her place there was something far more dangerous, a force that Kian couldn't yet comprehend. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. Days passed, though time seemed to lose its meaning as Kian lay in a cold, dark cell, his body aching and bruised. His wounds were bandaged, but the confusion in his mind remained. He had no idea how he was still alive or why the alien warrior Kayla had spared him. Everything had happened so quickly, the moment his blood had touched her skin. That strange, eerie silence that had followed still echoed in his mind, but he couldn't make sense of it. Was it fear? Was it something else? The sound of voices, outside the cell stirred him from his thoughts. They were muffled, but he could still hear the anger and disbelief in the words. Why did she spare him? One voice growled. She should have killed him, another argued. The words felt distant, like he was underwater, the gravity of the situation pressing in on him from all sides. He had been part of a war between two worlds, yet in the middle of it all, something had shifted. He was no longer just a soldier. Something about him had caught the attention of the most fearsome warrior the Arathu had ever known. As Kian tried to gather his thoughts, the cell door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was Kayla, the once confident alien warrior, stood before him, but this time, she didn't look like the relentless killer he had fought against. There was a softness in her posture, a vulnerability that he had never seen before. Her eyes, the amber hue that had once burned with the intensity of battle, were now filled with something else, something he couldn't quite understand. "You're awake," she said, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "I thought you would be dead by now." Kian remained silent, his throat dry and cracked. His body felt as though it were made of stone, every movement causing pain, but his mind was sharp. Kayla had spared him. She had walked away from the Siu battle when she should have struck him down. And now here she was, standing in front of him, not as an enemy, but as someone who seemed unsure of everything. "What happened?" Kian finally managed to croak. His voice was weak, but it held a note of curiosity. He needed answers. He needed to understand why Kayla had stopped, why his blood had affected her so deeply. Kayla studied him for a moment, her gaze flicking between his eyes and the ground. She looked as if she were struggling with something, some kind of internal battle. Her hand hovered near the wound on her face, where his blood had landed, still feeling the shock of it. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice quiet but honest. "But I saw something when your blood touched me. It wasn't just a feeling. It was like a memory, something ancient, something that shouldn't be possible. I saw temples. I saw humans walking alongside my people. And I saw one of them, a man with blood glowing gold in his veins." She paused, her brow furrowing. "It was like I was seeing a past life, a history that was erased long ago. I thought it was a dream, but it felt real, too real." Kian's heart raced as he tried to process what she was saying. He had never heard anything like this before. The idea of humans walking alongside the Arathu, of some hidden past between them, seemed absurd. Yet the look in her eyes, the fear, the disbelief told him she wasn't lying. She believed it. "Why would my blood show you that?" Kian asked, his voice low, still struggling to understand. "I'm just a soldier, I'm nothing special." Kayla shook her head, looking away for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I thought your kind was weak," she said, her voice distant. "I thought you were nothing more than primitive creatures. But now, I think your blood carries something else, something older, something buried deep in your genetics, something we call the echo of Thal." Kian blinked, the words unfamiliar to him. "Thal?" he repeated, the name stirring something inside him, though he didn't know why. "What is that?" The alien warrior exhaled slowly, as if the weight of the truth was too heavy to bear. "The echo of Thal is a myth, a legend among my people. We believed it was a tale, something to scare the young warriors. But now I think it's real." She looked at him, her expression grave. "Your blood, Kian, it holds the key to something that was lost long ago. It connects our two peoples in a way we didn't understand, in a way we weren't meant to understand." The words hung in the air between them, and Kian felt the gravity of the situation pressing down on him. He was caught in something far bigger than himself, something that spanned across history, something ancient. How could it be? He had lived his life as a soldier, a simple man in a war he didn't fully comprehend, and now he was hearing about some lost connection between humans and the Arathu, something that had been hidden, erased, buried for centuries. Kayla's voice softened, almost a whisper. "The leaders of my people destroyed all records of that time. They say it was heresy, but I know what I saw. And now, it's waking up. In you. Kian couldn't speak. His mind raced, and the weight of her words pressed on him like 1,000 pounds. What did this mean for him? Why had his blood triggered this ancient memory in Kayla? And what did it mean for the future of both their peoples? Before he could ask any more questions, the distant hum of engines filled the air. It was a sound he recognized all too well. Irathu hovercrafts, searching for them, hunting them both. Kayla's eyes flicked toward the door, her expression hardening. They know we're here. They're coming for us. Panic surged through Kian's veins, but Kayla remained calm. She turned to him, her face set in determination. We don't have much time. We need to leave now before they find us. Kian nodded, his body sore, but his mind clearer than ever. He didn't know where this path would lead, but one thing was certain. His life, his future, was no longer just his own. It was tangled with Kayla's, with the past, and with a future neither of them could fully understand. As they moved toward the door, ready to face whatever came next, Kian couldn't shake the feeling that something enormous was awakening inside him. And that awakening would change everything. Kian's heart raced as he followed Kayla through the narrow, twisting tunnels beneath the ruined colony. The dim light of a flickering torch illuminated the damp stone walls, casting eerie shadows that seemed to stretch and twist with every step they took. Kayla moved ahead with purpose, her movements quiet and calculated, as though she had walked these passages 1,000 times. Kian, on the other hand, stumbled behind her, his body sore from the wounds he had sustained, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The words Kayla had spoken haunted him, the mention of the echo of Thal, of some ancient connection between humans and the Irathu, something lost to history. He didn't know what it meant, but the weight of it pressed down on him with every step. His body ached, and every breath he took seemed to send pain coursing through his ribs, but he pushed on. He couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Not when they were being hunted. Kayla's determination was palpable, and he found himself following her, unsure of where they were going, but trusting her instincts. He had no choice. His world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours, and now his only hope for survival, for understanding what had happened to him, lay with the very warrior who had nearly killed him. As they moved deeper into the tunnels, Kian's thoughts wandered back to the moment on the battlefield, when his blood had touched Kayla's skin and everything had changed. She had frozen, her expression full of shock and fear, as though she had seen something in his blood that she wasn't supposed to see. It was a memory, she had said. An ancient memory of a time when humans and the Irathu had stood side by side. It had shaken her, and Kian could still feel the remnants of that strange unspoken moment lingering in the air between them. He had been ready to die. He had expected nothing more than a quick, painful end. Instead, he had been thrust into something far more complex, something far beyond his understanding. His blood, his very humanity, had triggered a response in Kayla, a warrior who had never known fear or doubt. And now here they were, moving through these dark tunnels hunted by both their people, with nothing but each other to rely on. Suddenly, Kayla stopped in front of him, her head tilting slightly, as if she had heard something he hadn't. Kian's senses immediately sharpened, and he strained to listen. The distant sound of engines reached his ears, the unmistakable hum of Irathu hovercrafts moving closer. They were getting closer. Kayla's face tightened, and Kian saw the same fierce determination that had been in her eyes on the battlefield. She turned to him, her voice low but urgent. We need to move faster, they'll be here soon. Kian nodded, his body screaming in protest as they picked up the pace. His mind, however, was consumed with the strange bond that had formed between him and Kayla. Despite everything that had happened, despite the war, despite the countless lives lost on both sides, he felt something, a connection. It was impossible, ridiculous even, but it was there. She had spared his life. She had seen something in his blood, something that had terrified her. But she had chosen to save him, to protect him. when she could have just as easily ended his life. As they ran through the tunnels, Kian couldn't help but wonder if this bond, this strange, unexplainable connection between them, had always been there, buried deep in their genes, just waiting to be awakened. Maybe it wasn't just his blood that had triggered something in Kayla. Maybe it was something more, something that neither of them fully understood. Something from a time long ago, when their two worlds had been united. Kayla glanced over, her shoulder, her golden eyes scanning the dark passage behind them. She seemed to sense the uncertainty in his gaze, and for a moment, their eyes locked. There was no animosity between them, no anger, just an understanding that transcended words. Kian could feel it, a bond that was almost impossible to explain. She wasn't just a warrior anymore. She was more than that. She had become something else, a protector, an ally, and maybe, just maybe, something more than that. They reached a large underground chamber, and Kayla motioned for him to stop. They crouched behind a pile of debris, listening as the sound of the hovercrafts grew louder. Kian's pulse raced as the ships drew closer. They didn't have much time. Kayla's face was hard as she scanned the room, her gaze fixed on the far side of the chamber. There was a small service hatch there, covered by vines and dirt. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, but it was their only way out. Kian's breath came in ragged gasps, but he nodded, understanding the urgency. He had no idea where they were headed, but he trusted Kayla. He trusted her in a way that defied logic, a way that felt like it had always been this way, as if they had known each other for lifetimes. They made their way toward the hatch, Kayla leading the way with the quiet, determined precision of a seasoned warrior. The sound of the hovercrafts grew deafening, and Kian could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. They were running out of time, and yet in that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Kayla reached the hatch and pulled it open with surprising ease. The rusted metal creaked, but it held. She motioned for Kian to follow her, and without hesitation, he slid into the narrow tunnel below. The air was musty and damp, but it was a refuge, a temporary escape from the hunters above. As they descended into the darkness, Kian could feel the bond between them growing stronger. It wasn't just a connection of blood or fate. It was something deeper. They were more than allies now. They were something else, something ancient, something forgotten, and together they would have to uncover the truth behind the echo of Thal and why it had been hidden for so long. As the hatch closed above them, sealing them off from the outside world, Kian looked at Kayla, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. The journey ahead would be dangerous, and they had no idea where it would lead. But one thing was certain: they were no longer enemies. They were bound by something greater than either of them could understand, and together they would have to face whatever came next.